Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head. And in this episode, I'm talking to Nathan Whitbread. He's the founder of the Neurodiversity Coach. They deliver coaching, training, and assessments to neurodivergent individuals, leaders, and teams. Alongside this, he's a workplace needs assessor for the British Dyslexia Association and a coach for Right Resources Limited. I'll put links to Nathan's business as well as the other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Oh, thanks, Matthew. It's great to be here.
No problem at all. Where I wanted to kick today's conversation off was I thought we'd dive right back to the very beginning of your career. I was having a look at your LinkedIn profile earlier on, and you started as a systems engineer before going into marketing and then into coaching, and we'll focus the shift to coaching a bit later on. But why did you jump around from engineering to marketing to a few other different roles? Because you spent a reasonable amount of time in each role. You're just testing careers out in your 20s.
Well, actually, it was quite... So, I mean, I guess that all kind of links with the whole dyslexia story, actually, in some ways. So when I first left university, I worked for Ericsson as an engineer.
Oh, yes.
And then because of various things, I'd been at University of Surrey down in Guildford. I got an offer to go and work for Barclays Life Assurance on their graduate scheme. So that's what sort of moved me around to London. That was sort of driven by wanting to actually finally leave university. And then from there, I sort of got a little bit stuck, as you do sometimes. You know, when you sort of hit that spot, you think, well, I really want to do something, and the opportunity I want's not really there. So I then applied to go and work for Cisco, which was, I guess, where I'd stayed for quite a long time, getting into the systems engineering piece. And I think for me, it just really got me into IT as well in a big way, which is really exciting. You know, it was a great place. I remember spending about 8 weeks in Brussels at the beginning of our journey there, basically learning everything there was to know. And it was just a great time, actually. It was just a really good time of learning, but also a good time just to kind of, I guess, hang out in a different space, in a different city, and really get your head around what it's like to get a bit more independent as well, which was great.
Yeah. You can sneak off to Brussels, and it's an interesting place to be. So that's kind of Cisco's with system engineering. So you spent a bit of time there as a system engineer, but what made you shift gears then into marketing?
Well, in Cisco, I basically made the decision that I enjoyed engineering, but I didn't really want to become a very specialist engineer. I was far more interested in the commercial side of things and in terms of developing what deals look like. So that's when I sort of made the movement. It was actually into account management, first of all, within Cisco, running the project they had. They're working with BT Business, and this was all at the pivotal time when BT was recognising their calls and lines business was going down the drain because the voice over IP was on the agenda. They'd got all their invested income in the sort of the switch telephony network, and suddenly there was these new players coming in who were disrupting that. So they wanted to get a slice of it. Yeah. So we were basically working with them to help them try and get access to that market. We actually built a product specifically for them as well, which was quite interesting. So I was sort of involved with the team that tried to make that work. And it did to an extent, but it was quite hard. It was a difficult market, and the sales, because of the traditional business they'd run before, it was difficult for them to adapt to it. So it was a really good learning curve for me, especially as someone who was quite young, believing you could change the world overnight, recognising that people are coming with a certain amount of history and good knowledge and understanding, not to discredit them. They knew their stuff well, but it was just like they were moving into a different space, and working out how to do that effectively was really hard, I think. So that was a valuable learning. And then from there, I sort of, once that had been developed, I moved off to then work sort of in finance for Cisco, looking at their bigger sort of high-touch accounts, mainly in the sort of retail finance area. So looking at their branch networks and things like that. But that whole process really got me interested in, that development of problem solving, because that's what it is, effectively. I think sales is an extension of engineering. It's about understanding people's problems and then working out how you're going to solve them for them in partnership. Because you can't tell someone what they need. They've got to understand it for themselves as well.
Yes, they do. Yes. Having tried to tell people what they need, yes.
Yeah. It takes a little while to get there. It's only in your 20s. It's a difficult thing to get your head around, that someone might actually need to work with you as opposed to you just telling the right answer.
Yes. And there's the anxiety in your 20s a little bit. Well, I always think that you feel like you need to be the person with the right answer, and you're kind of there, go. And you're like, actually, no, I need to collaborate more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally resonate with that.
So you said, I asked that question initially about your career jumping around sort of through your 20s, by the looks of it, you link it with your dyslexia story. So let's go back to the start of that. When did you find out about dyslexia, and when did you find out you were dyslexic?
Gosh, that was quite a lot later on, actually.
Okay.
So I now live in Cambridge. So I used to live in London at the beginning of this story, and I was at University of Surrey in Guildford, and then sort of moved back to North London and moved around London for a bit, and then moved to Cambridge. So for me, the pivotal moment was once we'd moved to Cambridge and relocated, I decided that I wanted to actually get some marketing qualifications. And I'd basically spent my life blagging it in terms of avoiding doing any sort of written examination. If there was a way out of it or a way to navigate not doing it, or you got the kind of idea. I'd been doing that, but I had nowhere to go in the end because I'd signed up for this qualification. They just said it was going to be closed book, sort of 3-hour examination papers. And I have to say, it made me feel a bit ill. So I spoke to my wife about it, and she said, you do realise you think a bit differently. You do realise that. Would it not be worth actually looking at it now instead of putting off this thing that's been looming in the background since I've known you? And we'd been married a while by that point. So I went off and got tested, and I've shared this story a bit before. And I went to this psychologist in London, and he did all the very. I don't know if you've sort of been through the testing process yourself, Matthew.
Yeah, I've been twice. Yeah.
Right, so you've got the verbal reasoning, you've got your pictorial stuff, you're doing all this stuff. So there was obviously something, I would say, obviously, for me, there was some things that really excelled at, and other things like verbal reasoning, word recall. It was quite horrendous to sort of see the results. So this guy just said to me, well, at least you're not thick, which I thought was
right, okay.
But there is a massive disparity between the person that you presents in front of me and what I see on the who speaks to me, and the person you see written in paper. Yes. And of course, then the penny sort of drops, and you realise, gosh, this is something I've been wrestling with. I'm now 35. I've been wrestling this my whole life. I've navigated university. I've navigated quite a lot of interesting roles, but I've been completely blagging it and hiding from these things that are tricky. And instead of getting tools and things that could support me and help me manage that better. So when I worked at Cisco, for example, I used to work for a fantastic guy, and we had some really interesting networking issues at one place, I remember. And he said, brilliant, why don't you write a report about it? And I said, there's no way I'm writing, that's someone that really struggles with that. It's just like, there's no way I'm writing a report. It's going to take me the best part of a month, I should think, to put a page together. I'm going to be comfortable with. And it's, it's just really hard work. It's really hard work. And what you get out would for me would felt just a disproportionate amount of time would go in to produce that, knowing full well someone else could do that quite rapidly. So after that assessment process and this sort of to do this marketing qualification, suddenly I got access to tools that I hadn't even thought about, like Dragon. And I mean, I'd say that's probably the main tool I still use today, but other tools, like mind mapping tools, things like thinking about using some of the platforms that are actually out there already, just more effectively, like Evernote for me and Todoist, just getting those tools in place to start to make life work. And it was just like, it was absolute. It's just an absolute sort of epiphany moment. And I think for me as well, Matthew, one of the things that really struck me was just this grief you have. You go, well, I've had to fight to kind of make this happen for so long, and it didn't have to be that way.
That's an interesting way of describing the grief you had.
Yeah.
Yeah, just was that kind of from reflecting back, you said you had to fight for so long. Was the grief more about the fight, or more the fact you wish you knew sooner?
I think it's more about the fact. I think it's probably about the fact it was really, some things were really hard, and I thought it was me, I wasn't enough. And now I know it's nothing. It's just there's some things that I find difficult, but that's not because I don't know the answer or I can't do it. It's just the modes of communication that were expected of me were just incredibly hard to operate.
Yeah.
And to have to go through that stress of thinking, these, for example, with examination results, they don't look familiar, you have all this messaging when you're at school, you're a bright person, you're intelligent, you're able to do stuff, and yet you're unable to achieve beyond mediocre GCSEs, for all sorts of reasons, because I mean, I should share as well, like, I've got some sort of ADHD traits that are screened and some autistic traits as well. So there's all that in the blend as well. So I've got, all this, and you think, well, actually, I know this stuff. You put me in a room and I can articulate and I can hold an argument about it, but I can't pass an exam in it. So what's that about? And I guess that's what I mean by the grief. And there's an element of, I think sometimes an element of shame, isn't there, in the fact that you've had something that's gone wrong when you think you've got it in the bag and you're going, well, what the hell happened there?
Yes, yeah.
So that's what I mean. I know if that articulates well.
Yeah, I think I'm following, and it's an interesting way to put it. Because quite a lot of people to speak to are a little bit more like, "Oh, that all makes sense," but you're actually sort of feeling kind of sad and grieving about how things could have been or why things weren't picked up earlier. That's
I don't have any regrets. Don't get me wrong. I'm not regretful. I mean, I totally get the fact that that life is the way it is, and we can't change what's happened in the past, but we can always choose what we do next.
Yeah,
but it's just a bit like, oh my gosh, what did it? It didn't have to be that way, and I guess part of that for me is now it shouldn't be the other way, that way for other people as well. Because other people shouldn't have to go on that journey.
Yes. And interesting because you managed to get to university to do an engineering degree, which I'm familiar with, and that involves a fair bit of writing at points and writing dissertations. And you can't hide behind just doing the practical bits.
No, or just talking a good game. No, definitely not.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not many verbal exams, but what did you do? Just burn lots of hours trying to catch up with?
Yeah, collaborated well, and I was fortunate to have quite a few mentors and stuff who were just very supportive. Because I did engineering with business. I did engineering with business and management as well, which was at Surrey, which was a slightly different sort of course. So, it kind of basically took out some of the higher end fluids and mechanical engineering, and sort of thermo and stuff like that, and you sort of replaced it with some rather interesting stuff around sort of constitutional law and things like that, which I'm not quite sure the relevance, but anyway.
but it was interesting, nevertheless.
And also they had a big CAD design part of it, which was right up my street, because I could think in 3D, so that was easy.
Oh, yeah. Use that to this day. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, you probably haven't heard of what they had there. It was something called Medusa, which was run on Sunspark stations, which when it did 3D rendering, basically you switched it on at sort of like 2 p.m, and it then would have finished rendering 24 hours later, sort of thing, to find out you've made one mistake, so you don't have to go back and run the one again.
Oh no, yes, yeah. Delayed rendering must be a nightmare.
So that was the world to grow up in.
The early days of CAD and like non-parametric modelling and all that fun stuff. But seeing as this is not an engineering life hack show, everybody's like, what are they talking about now? Did you have any dyslexia running in your family? Was there something then, once you knew that you were dyslexic, you started spotting in anybody else out of curiosity?
So there's no one else one of my sons is diagnosed with it, but apart from that, there's nothing up the tree. Though I suspect my mum has some traits of some stuff. I don't know what it is, but there's something there in terms of how she presents. And she's done very well. I mean, the way my mum would describe herself is tenacious. In terms of she just would never give up. She just kept going and going and going. And she really burnt the hours, in terms of getting through stuff. And it served her well, but you can see where that comes from. There's a real, I'm just not going to be beaten by anything ever.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and tenacity sometimes gets you a long way, particularly if you're having to, what's the correct word? But you've got a neurodiversity in place. So there's sometimes you need to probably be a bit more tenacious than your peers to get things done, depending on what system you're in.
Absolutely. Especially if those systems just aren't friendly.
Yes, definitely. I was interested in the mix you were saying. You got dyslexia with a bit of ADHD and autism mixed in. Now, obviously, I know a fair bit about dyslexia with ADHD. I've interviewed people with that. But throwing autism in as a third pillar of that, how does that all mix in? Because like autism sometimes have hyperlexia, and dyslexia is the opposite end of that spectrum. So what's it look like for you?
For me, I think, and as I said, I've not got diagnosis of those things. It's it's a screen trait. So, and they've come up on a couple of different screenings, which are reputable, which has been really helpful.
Okay.
I think it turns up bizarrely, because I'm quite an extrovert character, but sometimes it can flip into being someone that needs to be quite alone. And I think particularly under stress moments, I think for me, I really struggle with change, big style.
Right,
but yeah,
okay.
other times when I'm safe and everything's fine, I can deal with change really well.
Yeah.
So some of the ways it turns up. So it's it's a minor thing for me personally. It's not affect me hugely, but it does turn up in some of those places.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I've noticed in myself, but also in a lot of people I've worked with, is, all this stuff turns up quite differently in different people, because we have to look at the whole piece in terms of your social context, as well as, your upbringing and some of that life history, which we've already talked about, that influences how all this stuff turns up actually.
Yeah.
And how much of it you mask and how much of it you just let flow. And I think there's also something that goes on here about, as you become aware of it, it's almost like you become hyper aware of it sometimes. So then you start to overcompensate for some of the stuff that's going on. And I once found it quite helpful to think about it as a pendulum, because as you're becoming really aware of it, you sort of respond in quite a different way. You've almost got to normalize it till the pendulum drops to the bottom, to the normal state.
Right. Okay.
I hope that makes sense. I feel, I've not really thought about that question before.
No. It's an interesting thing. And as you say, neurodiversity is different for everybody. So your experience is your experience. But I thought it was a really interesting blend to add autism to the dyslexia ADHD mix. Now, I guess you were saying, obviously, you go for a qualification. That's where you got dyslexia screening. So post that, what did you change? And how did that help you get through your qualification?
Well, it was mainly actually, the Access to Work scheme was probably the pivotal piece, getting some access to a bit of coaching, but also getting some technology training just actually really shifted things for me. Dictation just changed everything.
Oh, yes.
It just completely changed everything overnight. So I went from someone that wouldn't write and would naturally avoid writing to someone that could write volume at speed. And especially when you start to put other tools in the mix like Grammarly, and that's a later addition for me, but some of those other tools, suddenly you've got a package of stuff that can help you produce really high quality content well. So I guess that was the big game changer. And also wrestling with some of those perfectionist things. So I think when things aren't right, you really want them to be so right.
Yes. Yeah. Almost as a compensation for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you would maybe give yourself a higher standard than anyone else would expect. And then when you can't meet that standard, that's difficult. So being a bit kinder to yourself in it as well, and actually recognising there is a drafting process for a reason is useful. Yeah. So that was really helpful, actually, and building those processes and writing them down as well, because when you kind of get lost in it all, you can come back to say, well, actually, I agreed with myself. This is what I'm going to do to make this work.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's big. It's big.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. You touched on the drafting process. I went for years thinking, well, everybody else is able to write an email out and hit enter. That's really not true. Everybody,
absolutely,
including the best speller I know, has to proofread everything.
Well, exactly. And it's not just about getting the words right, is it? It's tone. That's the other thing that I learned about later. It's like, how do you get tone right?
Yeah. How does somebody else not read your email up? What?
Well, exactly. And coming back to what you were talking about, autistic traits, that can be really hard sometimes.
Yes.
Because you can be very functionally correct.
Yeah.
But have no empathy sometimes.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Because you've misread the nuance of the situation.
Yes. Yeah. And that can be a real tricky thing. Now, obviously, you got your qualifications, continue on in your career. What point did you start shifting gears and thinking, I'm going to get into this coaching malarkey?
I think it was more by accident than anything. I'd love to say there was this perfect journey that started at school with the careers therapist, the careers teacher.
Well, we've already gone through system engineering marketing so far. So coaching doesn't feel like the most linear progression from them two.
Well, I don't know, because I'd say particularly with sales and business development, that's a partnership conversation.
Yeah, fair
And
point.
coaching is a partnership conversation. So there's probably not that. But what really drove me was the organisation that I originally had my access to work support through. I'd basically gone to do a short-term marketing cover contract with the National Trust in the East of England. And literally as that was coming to an end, I was just about to put my CV out to go, here we go, let's go find a job. They got in contact and said, one of our sort of trainers in the East of England area doesn't want to do it anymore. Would you like to come work for us? It was completely out of the blue.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what, I'll take a punt on it and see what this looks like, and just started working for them. And that as sort of as a freelancer, and from there things start. And it was initially as a sort of assistive technology trainer, and then gradually over time, sort of coming back to what I'd sort of shared before, I knew my real passion was actually in people and actually supporting them to build stuff that works for them in terms of solving their problems. And so I felt very strongly that the coaching approach is better, because actually that's more interesting, helping them build their processes.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's only so much you can say about a piece of technology. Nicest possible way.
Yes, I guess so. After the fourth week in the month that you've shown somebody how to use Dragon, you're like, okay.
Well, exactly. And I think actually the real magic in with Dragon is about your own processes, in terms of, it's not about the technology, it's how you're going to use it, where you're going to use it, what other tools you're going to use with it. Because coming back to my Cisco days, one of the things that I did take away from Cisco that I always thought was really powerful so is I've always been technology agnostic. So what I mean by that is I'm much more interested in what we're trying to achieve than the solution, how we get there, because the solution can change.
Yes. Yeah.
And I see a lot of people who are very wed to the solution.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're the ones that can really struggle to pivot when technology fundamentally shifts rapidly.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So trying to put that into so for example, if you like dictation, great, but you've got there's options, yeah. There's Dragon's great, but you also got Siri and you've got other platforms that you can use. So let's think about the problem we're trying to solve, as opposed to worrying about how we learn about all the widgets and bells on the technology platform. Would be my approach anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rather than geeking out about the platform and the nuances and what is my end goal? What am I trying to achieve? And You're not trying to achieve the most optimal dictation. You're trying to achieve the essay that you're dictating to the product.
Exactly. And also, what's the step change? Because if I look where I came from a place where that was nigh impossible. So now I can write. That's like an infinite change for me.
Yes.
The rest of it's just polishing. You know? And I'm not saying it's not good to continuously improve, but in terms of saying what's good enough to do what I need to do. And I think that's really important, because coming back to that perfectionist idea, I think there's sometimes a real pressure around some of this assistive tech for people to want to get every single last bell and whistle out of it, and they don't always serve them, or don't always solve problems they have.
No, it's doing the 80-20 analysis on it, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, you nailed it.
Yeah. Well, how can I use it and get the most out of this without every ninth degree? Yeah. And some of the stuff is fun to just know every nuance, but there's far more fun things to do that with.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was working with someone today who's brilliant. It's a social worker in Northampton, and she's obsessed with kit cars and airsoft.
Nice.
We could get much more fun things to be obsessed with.
Yeah. I can think of more boring things to get obsessed with. Yeah, but then we could do that.
Absolutely. And if you can combine the two together, you can have some real fun.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Doing a donut, shooting the airsoft outside the car. Yeah. Yes. So obviously you got into coaching that way, which feels like you kind of fell into it. But
yes.
And then never looked back. And now you run your own company.
Yeah.
So how did that shift into being your own company? And what did you think you could bring it as your own business versus what you were doing under somebody else's umbrella?
Yeah. So in terms of transparency, I always had my own company because I always worked as an associate for people. I've never was employed by them.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes.
But what changed for me was during lockdown when the world came to a grinding halt. And some people their businesses dried up. I was quite a vulnerable position. And it really made me think quite long and hard, actually, Matthew, about saying, well, actually, what am I doing and how? And I need to actually create some resilience in this business. And also it's an opportunity for me to bring who I am to the front. So that made me think, well, I've got to give it a name that matters and actually works. So I sort of did a bit of Googling, the normal sort of thing. Which domains are left in the world?
Yeah.
And the neurodivergent coach. And when I originally chose the name, I thought, well, that's me. But actually, as with all good marketing, there's nothing to do with me because no one cares about you. They care about their problems.
Yeah.
So actually it's worked quite well, but that was kind of where it started from. And it was basically a development over that time period from lockdown to say, well, and this is what I'm going to bring. So what I think, or what I wanted to be the USP was to say, actually, I think to do great work in this space, especially in this neurodiversity space, it's really primarily most important to be a great coach and have some appreciation of the neurodivergent traits rather than an expert in neurodiversity who happens to do a bit of coaching on the side. Because and the reason why I think that is because neurodiversity is so complex because of the way it turns up in people. If we're experts, maybe this is a bit harsh, but I almost feel like, who are we kidding? Because actually, how could I say I'm an expert in you, Matthew? I don't even, we've met each other, but exactly, it's just that sort of thing,
Yeah.
But actually, you're the only one that really knows who you are. So actually, as a coach,
if I can work with promises.
Well, yeah, I know. So maybe that's an overstatement, but you get the idea. But as a coach, we can work with, the idea of coaching is that you've got the stuff. We just need to create the right space to work it out.
Yes, yeah.
And that's really important. So that's what I wanted to bring. I also, from some of my early coaching, my experience was to be, I guess, almost treated in a sort of teacher-pupil relationship. And I felt that wasn't very helpful in the workplace. And I think things have shifted quite a lot, but it's just like, well, actually, if we don't trust people to help to solve their own problems, I think I don't know if you've had experience, well, I certainly have. I've experienced where I've discovered stuff in myself that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And people have told me things that have gone in one ear and out the other. So,
yeah, that happens. Yeah.
But so I would argue if we can help people truly discover things for themselves, then that's much more useful. And often, particularly in this coaching space, it's very small things that change everything. Just a different way of thinking about something, maybe a different way of thinking about ourselves, a different way of recognizing how to move forwards with the problem. Because, I've noticed there's quite a lot of stuff you work with people and you might think that's really obvious, but for them it wasn't obvious. But when they've discovered it, it's completely moved the dial for them in terms of how to live a more effective, life that they're really happy with. So that's what I've tried to do with the brands, really. And that's what it's tried to be about. And also to take quite a fair approach and wanting to be a facilitator of negotiation as well. And what I mean by that is I think there's something about working out what the negotiables are, what the non-negotiables are in a relationship. So particularly with an employer and employee, some things are not negotiable. We need some things to be in place to make life work. And there's some things that are negotiable. So how can we facilitate that in a better way? Because that doesn't always work nice and smoothly. It does for some employers, but for others, that's a bit tricky. So being able to step into that space as well has been really helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. You've dug into a lot of stuff there, really. Getting into different spaces. So it's really interesting. Talked to a fair few coaches via this podcast and various other things, and coaches not just in neurodiversity but in sport as well, and other means, business and CEOs. What I was kind of interested in is what's the sort of most interesting thing you found coaching people in neurodiversity, and how does your own sort of unique neurodiversity come to the sort of forefront of that? Any sort of methodologies you particularly employ if, say, I phoned you tomorrow, it's like, hey, I am drowning at work and I think it's my dyslexia that's holding me back. What do I do, please?
So in terms of methodology, I mean, I'm a big believer at keeping it as simple as possible. I think there's no silver bullets, but there is a conversation that can be had when two human souls, get together to work something out.
Yeah.
So there's no silver bullets to that answer, that question, but there is an exploration that says, well, actually, so what's real and present here? Where's your pain? And what does that look like? and then so for example, the basic model I use around coaching is something called Stokers. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I have not, no.
It's super simple. So it's just Stokers is very simple. S is like, what's the subject you'd like to talk about? T is, in the time we have, what would you like to be different? And then O is, what outcome do you want? And the K is, how will you know it's different? And then R is, how would you like to work together? And that's all about putting the power in the middle. Because, as I said before, coaching is all about a relationship of equals where we can work it out together, where you don't feel there's a power imbalance. And this is where do we start? The beautiful thing about Stokers is that, I don't know if you know about anything about tandem bicycles, but the Stoker's the person on the back.
Oh, is it? Okay.
and the captain's the person on the front. So it's just that idea of actually working together. Now, you as the captain in the coaching conversation as the thinker get to decide where the bike goes.
Okay, yeah.
And we work together to kind of solve it. But yeah, I wouldn't even pretend to know the answer. But what I would say is I'm really happy to partner with you to help work it out.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? Really, it's as you touched on earlier, people have the answers. It's making them realise they have the answers, I guess, is the trick.
Well, trusting them as much as they should trust themselves, I think, is another way to think about it.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a big thing for some people, the fact that someone said, well, actually, no, I'm going to go with where you need to go. And you never need to apologise in this space because this space is for you.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of that, isn't it? And I don't know. Non-neurodiverse people feel this as well, but I wonder how much higher it is in people with neurodiversity that you end up questioning your own mind sometimes, quite a lot of the time, because you're so used to being in places where I think like this and everybody else is like, nope.
No, I hear you completely. But the other thing I've noticed as well is, if you work like that, quite often people get to the answers quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because part of your job as a coach is to clear the mess out of the way.
Yes.
Or help someone clear the mess out of the way so they can get a bit of clarity in terms of what they really need to be thinking about. Yeah.
What is some of your sort of favourite sort of success stories? You had particular individuals, and you don't have to name them or share gory details, but what sort of thing has really jumped out at you? Like, wow, that was a great project I had with that person.
I think from an organisational level, I did a really good bit of work earlier last year where it was funny because we started talking off about neurodiversity, and then rapidly the organisation went, well, we really need to take this approach to inclusion, actually. We need to ask people and make it, and just work. And the bit we did a workshop for a day in London actually, which was great. And it was just that whole thing about going, well, what do we need to do to remove the barriers to inclusion in this organisation? What does that look like? And it was all frighteningly simple, actually. Yes. And also what came out of it was that the amount of individuals that I've identified with various needs that just went, if we can have safe spaces like this to have that conversation, I feel heard. And that's actually, for me, an awful lot of the kind of struggle that I'm working with. So that felt like a really powerful thing. And some of the feedback was, I'd never had the opportunity to talk like that at any other work meeting. We actually had a chance to get to the nub of what the problem was. In terms of individuals, I mean, it's quite interesting because I've worked with a lot of people. I've always had this real kind of driver to be attentively not bothered. And what I mean by that is, I'll explain what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely attentive to what's going, but I'm not bothered because the outcome is yours, not mine.
Yeah.
So I can be genuinely impartial, and that's all about not taking the stuff home.
Okay.
In terms of the grief or what, whatever comes out, actually being able to just leave the stuff where it is. So that means that honestly, sometimes you don't remember because actually you do the work in the place and then you leave it in the place. And that's about surviving as a coach, I think, sometimes, because I think you can easily take that stuff home and it's not yours to take home.
That's a very good point, actually. Yes. Yeah. The sort of how do you unplug from spending.
So there's a bit of that thinking, but there's also, I think there's something really crucial about having supervision, because especially in one-to-one coaching, so there's normally only two people in the room. And so who you accountable to? And I think that's really why it's really important to have oversight and supervision, so that someone is someone you've got a place of reflection and also a place of someone to talk to, actually, if you feel something hasn't worked well. So safeguarding stuff does come up from time to time. I mean, some people who have neurodivergent traits experience horrendous bullying in the workplace and things like that. So I think being super confident about what you're going to do when things don't look right and take affirmative action, within the bounds of what you agreed. So I would always contract with someone, which felt weird when I first did it, but now I feel quite comfortable about it. Everything remains confidential unless we come across something where where you're at risk or someone else is at risk or a third party's at risk, and then we need to work out what we're going to do with it.
Yeah.
And we can't keep it a secret because actually that's been made. You've made that public, and if someone's sort of at risk, so I think that's really important to hold in that. So there's, I guess, coming back to your question about success, sometimes there's success in that, in actually being brave enough to support someone when they didn't think they should have support. And help them navigate a process so they can get to a safer place.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really interesting in the safeguarding stuff and how, and I imagine it takes a few sessions to coach them out of we do need to escalate this now and talk to somebody else or.
Sometimes things, I mean, as you can imagine, as you build rapport and relationship, it takes a little while before people trust you. Sometimes that happens really rapidly.
Yeah.
But I think it's also what's interesting, Matthew, is when people talk about some of their stories, and you just realise it's a bit like that frog in the the sort of frog in the bowl thing. You cook a frog by putting it into cold water and then heating it up as opposed to putting it into hot water. And I think it's a bit of that going on in terms of people. If the environment's gradually heated up over a number of months or years, they don't see it themselves. So actually, in the coaching space, you can reflect back. Well, this is what you're sharing.
Yeah.
And as you hear that, what does that sound like? And then suddenly the penny drops. Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
And that could be good and bad, by the way. I mean, but sometimes in trickier situations, that reflection can come out.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, really interesting. That is, you certainly get into some deep stuff, and it sounds like you've got some good methodology when you get home to decompress from that all afterwards.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of catastrophic otherwise.
Yes. And I think we all need to kind of remember to not take work home with us as much as maybe sometimes we do after a long day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool. So every guest that comes on this podcast gets 3 rapid fire questions from myself, and this is how we like to wind up the podcast. Yeah. So they're rapid fire questions from me, but they don't necessarily need rapid fire answers from yourself. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
Tricky question. I don't know, actually. Maybe, actually, I do know. No, it's not true. I think possibly there's something about that dyslexia is all about reading, when actually, from my experience and the people I've worked with, the most common thing that comes up with dyslexia that I've noticed is short-term memory.
Yes. Yeah. Something I personally struggle with, yeah.
And that's true, of course, lots of other neurodivergent traits as well. But it's just interesting because obviously the name puts it lexic words. Yeah. But actually, that's not the real gig.
No, but because the words one is what everybody sees.
Exactly.
You get an email, a text message, whatever from a dyslexic person, depending on how they got things set up. But
I hear you.
Yeah. Having to refresh your short-term memory every 5 minutes is not what other people see, is it?
Well, exactly. I don't know what your you shared a little bit about short-term memory, but for me, it can literally involve leaving the room to do something and then getting halfway there and forgetting what I've even started doing because I've been distracted. Or I had a classic the other day where someone phoned up to her for like a Zoom call with one of our kids, and I booked it in the diary, set it all up, and then we had a bit of a meltdown for some other reason. It just gone. Just completely gone.
Yes. The one that's most noticeable to me is that sometimes you get your recipe boxes where you book cooking dinner off a recipe card, and it's do this, and this much ingredients. Now, I can cook, and I know how to cook lots of recipes. I tend to freestyle it, so it's a bit more loose. But it's so taxing to cook off a recipe card because I can't remember it all. I have to keep going back, and then I can't get the timings right because I'm like, right, I've forgotten it. Back there again. What am I adding now? And there's always something missing.
Absolutely. And the other complication we get with that as well, I think, is because we're really trying to encourage our kids to cook who really want to help. Yeah. So, of course, they get involved. And then it's just like we've got child management with recipe card that we're not really understanding, with quantities I don't really get, and it's just not a great experience. And then I'm freestyling at the same time as well. So, how many variables can you have in one operation?
Yeah. Oh yes. It's all fun and games, though.
Absolutely.
Okay, and question number 2 in this rapid fire set: if an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
Your best friend.
Yeah.
I think that's all about, saying, well, actually, I know as someone who's got a dyslexic diagnosis that I see the world slightly differently.
Yeah.
And so do you, because you're an alien.
Yeah. You'd like to think they did.
Well, perhaps they don't. But it's just that kind of idea, actually, isn't it? And it's interesting, that terminology, isn't it? Because actually, there's something really about that in terms of, that seeing the world differently, and how do you make sure that difference is actually something that's celebrated and utilised to further the human race instead of thwart it,
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, and the final question of this rapid fire set, and you're not allowed to promote your own business on this one. Seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack?
Okay. I think be kind to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Goes a long way.
Goes a very long way.
Yeah, it does.
Believe it or not, you probably are the very best at being you.
Yeah, I'm not very good at being other people, I've discovered.
Well, there's no need for that, though, is there? But it's just something. But I think there's something about that. And you know what? I think there's something about when you can stop getting wound up about this comparative stuff, start just thinking about being the best at being you.
Yeah.
It can be a complete, I'd say that to anyone, but particularly with people who've, had some of the kind of stresses and complexity around some of these neurodivergent conditions, the real recognition of that, and getting this, and in that, I think getting in the space and a role and if it's possible, or doing the things that you love doing, that you can succeed at, because actually there are loads of things you can do brilliantly.
Yeah.
And you can spend your life beating yourself up about the things that you find difficult if you're not careful.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. Okay, before we wind this podcast up, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Is there anything else I'd like to add? Just that I'm really passionate about supporting coaches actually as well, to helping them on this journey, to take their, so they can be even more confident working with neurodivergent individuals. You're probably doing it already, but it's great to spend some safe space doing that. And if you want to carry on the conversation, I'm really happy to pick it up, because actually it's important to keep talking and working this stuff out.
Yes, definitely. Yes. Well, I want to thank you, Nathan, for taking the time to come on the episode this evening.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you for having me. It's great.
No problem at all. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.